Hey everyone, welcome to the Open World Summit 2020. For today, we have an interesting session on this panel. So my name is Bobby, I'm the co-founder at CoinGecko, and the session that we're on today is this session titled Driving Mainstream Adoption of Dapps. We've seen a lot of digital collectibles and applications growing at unprecedented pace in the crypto space for the past few years. And for today, we have three really awesome panelists talking about NFTs and digital collectibles. And we would love to welcome Naayem, Chief Business Officer at Dapper, Min Teo, Managing Investing Partner at Consensys Labs, and Yat Siu, Chairman at Animoca Brands, the company behind the Sandbox and F1 Delta Time. So I guess for a start, right, guys, let's go through the three of you and let's have a quick round of introduction. Tell us a little bit about yourself, about your company, and what do you guys do in this digital collectible and Dapps space. Mick, you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a co-founder and chief business officer at Dapper Labs. Previously, I was founder and CEO of Fuel Powered, a game platform that actually Yat from Animoca acquired a couple of years back. And I've been a board member of Axiom since essentially it was started. Dapper Labs is a consumer blockchain company that really cares about bringing a future of decentralized apps and all the good things that come along with that.
Min?
Hi everyone, I'm Min, I'm based in London, and I lead the investment team at Consensys. We've been investing in the space for several years now, and we have a portfolio of more than 100 early stage companies ranging from infrastructure to middleware to Dapps to analytics. Mainstream adoption of Dapps is something that we're extremely passionate about, and we do believe our ecosystem has reached a really interesting inflection point in terms of UX and resilience this year. Thank you for Flow team for having me. Really excited about the discussion.
Great. So my name is Yat. As mentioned earlier, I'm the chairman and co-founder of Animoca Brands. We have a number of blockchain, related games on market right now, like the Sandbox and F1 Delta Time. So the cars you can see behind. Our whole start in non-fungible tokens actually happened because we were acquiring Mixed Business. And Mixed Business actually was sharing an office with Axiom Zen, which happened to ultimately morph into or spin out as Dapper Labs. So that was sort of our beginnings. So we had a front row seat as to the developments of CryptoKitties, and very quickly caught on to NFT religion, as it were, as a way to really deliver property rights for gamers. That something that didn't exist before. So basically, from late 2017 to early 2018, we invested heavily. I think the difference about us is that we are actually a traditional game company with traditional game assets. So we have 15 million users on our platform playing normal games, shall we say, and only a small set are playing these new blockchain games, but we aim to basically bring them over. And we do strongly believe that games is that channel for mass adoption for blockchain.
Interesting. Definitely we have a lot of questions for you from your point of view as a game developer, from a traditional game developer and moving into this NFT space. I'll ask later on. But let's start a little bit with the NFT space, right? So this webinar is really tiny in the sense that the crypto space has the narrative in the crypto space has morphed from DeFi, everyday DeFi to NFT, and like in the past week or so. And this week itself, we kind of saw this token called Meme, this community token that airdropped NFTs to this community, saw a 20x growth. It was trading for $100 just last week, went all the way to $2,000 and back down to about $800 or so. A lot of people were really excited about NFTs. And let me hear your thoughts from the panelists that we have today. Where do you see the future of digital collectibles and NFTs? And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when we first started talking about NFTs at Dapper Labs, the thing that the conversation we were having was really around in life, the things that you really care about are the non-fungible things, like whether it's your home, it's your car, your friends, what your daughter builds for you. And really we see fungible things like dollars really as a means of exchange to really acquire those non-fungible things or facilitate those non-fungible things to exist and to transfer. And so we felt that blockchain without non-fungible tokens is just like a cold desert lacking of color. And so really kind of when we kind of project ourselves in the future, I think that we'll see today non-fungible tokens or NFTs are really seen as a subset of blockchain, but I think in the future we'll see it as an inherent part of most decentralized apps. And whether that's games, collectibles, but also insurance, real estate, identity, social apps, we just see them being just a natural part of the whole ecosystem.
So maybe I'll quickly chime in, you know, from a game developer's perspective anyway, is that sort of the attractive part about non-fungible tokens is that, as Mick pointed out, you know, these non-fungible aspects of our real life have value attached to it, right? And, you know, the material that it's made of may not be that valuable, but actually the memories attached to it make it invaluable, right? Like wedding rings or sort of sports articles or photographs, you know, of your family or your grandparents or whatever that is, right? They may not be valuable for most people in the world, but even amongst a small community that might be your direct family, they're priceless, right? And that's what you see in the real collecting world. That's why stamps are valuable. That's why, you know, like, you know, the secondhand tennis rackets from, you know, famous players is valuable, even though they're sort of useless to actually play with because they're probably too banged up. So these are things that now you can do with games in the context of something like blockchain. And the part that's important to understand is that, you know, people already buy virtual goods today, right? You know, anywhere from 60 to 80, or in some cases they say $100 billion of these virtual goods are being purchased. But the virtual goods have no real value because they exist inside games. But when a person buys these virtual goods, they actually think of them as something that they own until they don't. And I think so blockchain offers that solution, and it's a natural narrative for that. So I think that's there, but gamers don't quite understand that. But I think this is where the promise of NFTs are, because actually you have, as far as we're concerned, 2.6 billion people out there ready to embrace a market that's basically already trading in these assets, just not really thinking of that way. And game developers not thinking of it that way because it's really just to support the games. And just quickly on the meme, the meme token, I mean, you know, I think the NFT utility was sort of an add-on, right? Because meme was, you know, I look at meme and sort of, I think of it as a Dogecoin of NFTs at this point. But, you know, it's still around, right? It's sort of in its own funny way thriving. But sometimes you, just like we've seen with the dot-com bust or maybe the early ICO craze, whatever, you sometimes need these explosion of craziness to have awareness grow into it. One of the struggles that we had early with awareness of what is an NFT in the blockchain space was that actually most people who had crypto didn't have an NFT. Right? I think the last study said there was 150,000 wallets had NFTs out of what, 40 million, you know, wallet owners, right? So the narrative there was already tiny. And what's happened, what meme and other things that have taken place have really done is created this awareness where people are like, what's an NFT? Oh, wow. You know, like I heard about CryptoKitties, but you know, that sort of, you know, not really care about that. That's all come. And so I think that's the net positive in terms of at least the conversation is out. And as usual, there's good and there's bad, but now we have dialogue, right?
Yeah, definitely echo Yat's comments. And, you know, interestingly, the meme guys are like friends of mine. And, you know, it started as a joke, like the meme degenerator, and it's funny. And now they're working around the clock, like, you know, trying to, you know, address the needs of the community. And, you know, we'll see if it turns into something big, like, you know, they've got 10 million locked up. And it's incredible how quickly the space innovates and iterates. And I think it is part of a broader macro trend where, you know, we just see a shift from physical good ownership to digital asset ownership. There's a study done that, you know, I think more than 50% of Gen Z don't believe that don't see a need for car ownership, but, you know, they will happily spend about 13% of their budget on gaming, buying skins on Fortnite. You know, so that's the ethos of like the future generation towards enabling more like digital interactions with assets that people care about and value, especially when it's harder for people to get, you know, exposure to yield in traditional assets. And this really forms the basis for a directional shift in terms of enabling people to own assets that appeal to them, be it crypto, collectibles, or art. I think 2 points on NFTs from my perspective is the first thing is that, as alluded to, like they do really require context in order to accrue true utility value. So while the collectible creates a hook necessary for user engagement, like personally, I would like to see more development of games and virtual worlds that users can utilize and developers can compose their NFTs into. So that, you know, we stop this or we go beyond the whole like speculative nature of NFTs that prevail today. The second element is that NFTs are also very powerful developer tools. You know, people associate NFTs with scarcity, but they are actually providing, I think, very useful in terms of providing structure. So, you know, actually being able to control access, user controls, permissions. One thing that, you know, the scarcity is really, I think, imbued on the NFT by the developer or by its creator. So it's also important to bear that in mind because I think it's a very important composable primitive in the blockchain space. And if scarcity is just one element of it.
Interesting answers from all the panelists. Yeah, I'd like to dive in here from a perspective of game developer. So do you see a future where game developers adopt NFTs, which can be used across multiple game platforms? So like game developer A, B, and C come together and let's say, like, okay, they were going to create a bunch of NFTs, and then these NFTs will be used across these different platforms. And I guess the next question I want to ask is like going on from there, is like, what do you think will happen? Because what do you think needs to happen? Because at this point in time, game developers are not incentivized to issue NFTs because the NFTs can be used and someone else can build a game on top of these NFTs that they issue. Game developers are incentivized to keep their in-game items gated because that's sort of the way that most game developers make a large portion of the revenue. So just like to hear your thoughts about these topics.
Well, great. So I mean, I get asked this question a lot, especially by game companies, because they're just like, why would you do that? Why would you let your customers go somewhere else, right? I think one of the big things right now that I think to me, the short answer is if you want to keep your game small, then by all means have a walled garden, right? So that's kind of generally the way we think of it, because effectively some of these smaller communities grow very large, but at the end of the day, they don't have their full potential because they're locked inside essentially that sort of walled garden, prison, whatever you want to call it, of a game environment. And I think we've seen in the past for these ones, when if it's like essentially, do feudal economies do better, or do open economies, sort of more democratic environments do better, broadly speaking, right? And I see games in their worlds basically that, right? Where only a small percentile, which is the game developer and perhaps their shareholders, benefit, much like the feudal lords or the kings in their time benefit. And so just like today, they have no reason to share. They have no reason to say, you know what, let's give something to the people because maybe it brings everyone else up, but I lose a bit of power. Maybe I lose a lot of power. Now, the net effect is that theoretically they have more wealth, but they also lose more control. And it's very rare that a feudal kingdom, you know, voluntarily gave up their rights. Right? It just doesn't happen until an outside force came in and forced them to do so. Free trade is like that as well, or open internet or open source is like that as well. The strength and power of what you could get from an open society was so strong that they had to open up to receive it. Otherwise, they would get left out and they would stay small. And we see this many parallels, not just, you know, the only parallel what hasn't really existed is the virtual one, because, you know, there was no way in which you could have that kind of validation. You know, in the real world, you have at least government or structure or enforcement if something happens. But in the digital world, you have to trust, as it were, the digital kingdom to say, oh yeah, actually you do own it, or maybe you don't, right? And there's no legal structure around that. So now going into the next part, which is where do we think the benefit lies and why should a game developer sort of actually embrace that? Today, game developers are limited because they are everything in one. Because they are the kingdom, they have to be all businesses, all activities, and manage everything. Actually, that's difficult, right? Because you're limited by the capacity of what the company can offer versus the entire creative pool of a company. We see this with UGC, right? I mean, you know, UGC is more powerful because of the network effect of all of its community that can benefit, rather than have single studios control storytelling narratives, for instance, right? YouTube versus, you know, natural general broadcasting, for instance. So again, that opens that up. And right now, if you look at esports, it's limited because really the companies behind it are both the, like the NBA is basically Nike, is basically ESPN, and is a sport of basketball, all in one, right? And while that sounds appealing because you control it all, actually it's limiting. Imagine if that were true in the real world. Actually, the sport of basketball would be much smaller, right? There would be less participation. There would be no sponsorship from a Nike because it can't exist because Nike can't make goods for basketball. It has to be made within, that environment. So what we believe in is that when you finally open up all of these digital worlds or economies, then it's going to be this sort of explosion of creative production capabilities. You'll have the equivalents of the Nike and Puma or Adidas's in the real world enter essentially the virtual world, where I can bring my assets to games. And I think that becomes really interesting because, of course, customers will travel around because of the ownership, but at the same time, they get the benefit of that user acquisition because I can use my virtual cars, for instance, in one game or another game because I have real asset ownership. So we think that's really powerful. The other thing I think is it also breaks open these monopolies of discovery, which is that now that because you have the content and content creators, the discovery mechanism will be where the content is found in different environments rather than I go to a single place to have my content discovered. And in fact, we see this dynamic today already with NFTs, right? NFTs are being split out in marketplaces and other games as a means of discoverability rather than you have to go to like the Apple Store equivalent or the Spotify equivalent to find your particular content. Actually, it's everywhere. And the key beneficiary, of course, is the actual creator itself as well. So that's, I could talk about this endlessly, but those are some of the main benefits. And so maybe broadly put, I would say, gaming is a $150 billion industry today. But if you do open it all up, that industry will turn into a multi-trillion-dollar industry. The facts are that of the $150 billion industry, the conversion rate of users is less than 3%, 1.5%, right? So gaming is actually a whale market, right? Most people who play Candy Crush don't pay a dime, but the small number pay actually thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. So actually participation is already limited precisely because of these walled garden environments. If you have true ownership in this, which blockchain can deliver, then we think everyone will have to participate or wish to participate because there's a benefit. And this will turn into something bigger than what we see with the App Store and what the smartphone delivered.
Would you say that the reason why we don't see massive adoption of NFT in the game space right now, I don't think, the big boys like Fortnite, Tencent, I don't think they are the ones that would adopt NFT at the start. Would you say that the reason that the NFTs are not popular these days because there is no single small NFT developer that can make a game that is very addictive, that has captured the minds and imaginations of the global audience?
Well, to be clear, this space is about 2 years old, right? So, it takes time to make actually a really good game, right? So when you talk about games like Fortnite, or Roblox didn't become a sensation overnight. It's 7 years of hard work, right? So the same is true for games, right? So we started working like with Sandbox. That's an effort that started actually almost 3 years ago, and it's really starting to bear fruit right now. Now, what happened before was in the blockchain spaces that there were a number of people who were like, wow, games, makes sense, right? Because gamers understand virtual currency, they're already dealing with virtual goods, logical, right? But they never made a game. So the first generations, many of the first generations, CryptoKitties was a great start, but it was an experiment, right? It wasn't designed, Mick, correct me if I'm wrong, but it wasn't designed really as it's sort of this big and MMO environment. It was more like non-fungible tokens. We should do something cool with that. Enter CryptoKitties, right? Like Beanie Baby style. So it made a movement, but it wasn't designed for like longevity, right? And the companies that really entered that space, companies like ourselves or others, really started putting work in this in earnest around mid-2018, if you think about it, right? So at that point, we are 1 to 1.5 years in full development. So my personal view is that by the end of the year or early next year, we'll see our first sort of million user games out there because they're developed by studios with real budgets and real know-how in making games, but designed from the ground up to be economically designed for a blockchain environment.
So let's jump into Min, right? So Min, as a managing investment partner at Consensys Labs, I'm pretty sure like you see a lot of pitches from teams on like devs, NFTs. So I guess my question is, have you seen many of these teams pitching you or building building NFT elements in games? And what do you look out for before you invest in teams that are working on this in this space?
Yeah, so to address your question, I mean, in terms of our investment strategy, we identify as being talent-first investors. And, you know, we really look to back teams who are focused on creating long-term sustainable value in the space. And backing, you know, talent is important because, as Yad alluded to, the space is very early. I think founders need to be able to zigzag and pivot and pirouette all over to figure out what works for them now. How do they actually bootstrap adoption, liquidity? I think for Dapps and NFT specifically, like founder product fit in terms of, you know, going after a specific segment or creating an environment with easy incentives for creation, like that's something that we really look for. You know, you can see someone who maybe identifies a market gap, but doesn't necessarily have a personal relation to the issue, you know, might not actually understand what the problem they're trying to solve is. Like, you know, I think it's a lot stronger where you're like, hey, like, you know, I was a gamer, or like, you know, I'm a Star Wars fan, and I can't believe that I waited 6 years to see like the next version of the last season of Clone Wars because they decided to have a stupid like last trilogy that nobody liked, right? Like, I think when you have that, those kind of personal issues, it really motivates you to create a solution that works. I think the, you know, teams that can see the preconditions to success are very, very important. So they need to be obsessed with user experience, with developer usability. Also the ability to create a community with very, very strong network effects where people are inspired and also empowered to build off existing content and get wide distribution that way. I think founding teams really need to be a talent magnet to attract, you know, a very organic community and empowered devs to join their journey. And lastly, but, you know, probably most importantly is the long-term vision. Like what target segment do you want to serve? Like, you know, right now we have a lot of bootstrapping of NFTs that's happening, and that's fine and great. But do you want to serve artists? Do you want to serve content creators like TikTok stars, gamers? Having very strong like BD capabilities and the vision of what problem am I solving for my target market is essential, because then you can actually see how is the world changing, where is it going, and how can I actually capitalize on that shift.
So, Mick, I'm just going to jump in to you. Like, I mean, Yad mentioned earlier just now, CryptoKitties to him is sort of viewed as like an experiment. Do you sort of agree with that? And to a lot of people, like Dapper Labs sort of had a lot of success with CryptoKitties because it sort of made non-fungible tokens like a big thing in the space. But it almost also seemed that it's been pretty hard to replicate the success of CryptoKitties since like the early hype that we received at the start, like in 2018. It was a big hype of CryptoKitties, and then not been down so much. And I guess you guys tried to launch a couple other games in the space, but it's been hard to replicate the success of CryptoKitties. So I'm just curious to hear, like, what are your team's thoughts about replicating success of CryptoKitties, and where do you see CryptoKitties moving forward with things?
Next question. No, I'm kidding. So there's a couple of questions in there, and I think let's start with the first one, which is what I understand is the first one, which is it's hard to replicate success, and I think a lot of people believe that games are essentially a hit-based industry. We don't believe that, and I think that what we've come to learn over the last 3 years building games, and in the past maybe working on game platforms, is that it's a lot of it takes a team of people with really good skill sets, takes being obsessed with the product, being open to user testing and iteration, and pouring a lot of love into that product. A really good example is what we've done with NBA Top Shot. With the collectible, we came up with tens of different collectibles that we put in front of our different audiences to really kind of coalesce around this cube with the video that really hit the audience. Similarly with the game, we did I think close to 30 different paper prototypes we then built a couple of versions of the games that didn't test well and went back to the drawing board to finally get to the game that's currently in alpha and testing really, really well, which is built with Sumo Digital. And so it's really about taking the time to build a great game. And as Yad mentioned, those things are not built over time, not built overnight. They take a while to come to market. I'll be curious to kind of see if Yad has anything to say about whether or not they found a way to build great games a little more predictably. But when it comes to CryptoKitties, the Axiom Zen philosophy was always build MVPs, especially when you're going into new markets. And so build an MVP, get it out there, and then once it's out there, take those learnings and build on top and grow from there. With CryptoKitties on Ethereum, we ran into a bunch of limitations, but the team has continued with CryptoKitties, we still have a very, very active core community, and the team's been working tirelessly to build CryptoKitties 2, which will incorporate CryptoKitties in a way that can scale to millions of users.
Maybe I'll add quickly to Mick's point about sort of predictability of making games, which is inherently unpredictable in the way that it is today. And frankly, the appeal of blockchain games, or essentially real property rights, has one added element, which is ownership and a stake in the success of the game, right? It's always different when you have, your players actually own a piece of the game, but it's not necessarily owning shares in the company, but it's owning a part of that community. And so, as we've seen in the crypto world, once you own a part of the token, some of them are flippers and some of them don't care, but a whole bunch of them do care. And they have now a vested interest in its success and are also rewarded for that vested interest and for their loyalty and for their community support, right? Which is something that games didn't really have before, right? No matter how much effort you put in, how much you supported it, at the end of the day, the game developer either likes you or doesn't like you. And anyway, you don't get free stuff. It's the money train is one way only. And as a consequence, if I leave a game, I might have some emotional loss, but that's it. So the cost of leaving a game is also low, right? Now, if all the games were real economies, then you have real cost of switching as well, which means that, in our view anyway, the first set of games that launch well in this space have an advantage from a first mover perspective. But much like the real world, there's going to be room for many countries and many cities to thrive. So the same will be true for games.
What do you guys think are like the best in-game NFT items to be sold? So, I mean, the trend that I'm seeing is that there's a lot of game developers sort of selling land like on their game, which is like becomes like a digital real estate play, and like some land are more strategic, therefore it has higher value. And then we also see like the Axie Infinity team doing this play to earn game where you sort of play and then you kind of mine some tokens. It could be ERC20 or it could be some NFT that you discover in a game that could be used and sold on a marketplace, whatever it is. So I'm just curious to hear, like, from your perspective, what sort of items do you think are the best to be sold to the gamers? And is there any good distribution method to distribute these NFTs to the gamers out there?
Well, maybe I'll start quickly. You talked about land. Certainly Sandbox is guilty of that. So it sells land a lot, but it does so successfully. And, its land sells out within like 10 or 20 minutes in the past anyway. And part of the reason why I think the land narrative works is because it's the closest sort of narrative that fits with sort of an investing community, right? They may not necessarily fully understand the value of a sword just yet because there's utility attached to it, but they can somehow emotionally understand the value of land because you can rent it or you can develop on it and so on. So, and that's what games are as well. It's a form of media and content as well. So it's like when you watch a movie, right? If you will watch a movie that's based on your culture or based on your background, you have an understanding of it and a natural way of sort of getting it. Whereas if it's an alien concept, it's harder because you just don't understand what's going on here. And I think that's basically what's happening here as well. And the land narrative fits. And one of the discoveries that we've had when we, for instance, sort of listed Sand on Binance, what happened was that 120,000 Sand owners basically came on board who had really never heard of NFTs before, right? But the narrative from the sort of a blockchain crypto guy was, well, a token I get, a fungible token I get, but non-fungible, that sounds kind of weird. I don't know what that is quite. So, but now because of that, because we were sort of speaking in the vernacular of the crypto enthusiast, they now got into it, right? And so as more games started issuing these tokens, really, do all of these games need tokens? Maybe not, but the community understood that. And so I think land sales right now are popular because of that, right? You have, you know, sort of social tokens like Whale that have basically sort of bought land. Maybe 50% of their assets are actually sandbox land. And people are sort of buying the tokens on the value of that, which is great. But it's something that's understandable. But, you know, there's other trends, you know, whether it's art, whether it's utility. Where I think it becomes fascinating for game assets is that game assets can become valuable because of what is being done to them and where they're used. So, you know, we had some of our Formula One cars be sold for quite a bit of money because they're original cars. So there's a story behind that as well, because they're unique or they're special. But eventually, these cars can win victories, right? They can do stuff, and it'll be remembered. It'll be on the ledger. People will know that that's happened. The original Ferrari car will have won these virtual races, or, you know, an esports champion used that car and won something with that. So you can actually accrue value into these assets for what they've done because of the ownership aspect. So I think, you know, we're on phase 1 of the understanding. So land is great, but I think in phase 2 and phase 3, we'll branch out into all the other assets as well.
So maybe I ask you a question on Mick, I'll ask you a question on Flow blockchain, right? So you guys started with CryptoKitties on the Ethereum blockchain, built it, kind of clogged up the entire Ethereum network, realized that Ethereum is not good to scale, realized that probably you guys want to do your own blockchain so that it's highly scalable, high throughput, low gas costs. But my question, I guess, is why do you guys want to launch your own blockchain instead of building on an existing layer 2 or build a layer 2 on top of Ethereum? There is a lot of effort to onboard new users to sort of get familiar to the entire tooling of a new blockchain. Like, I mean, it's not easy for someone to get used to Ethereum. You've got to have a wallet, you've got to have MetaMask installed, and get used to Etherscan within the Block Explorer. Like, I mean, doing another blockchain, you have to recreate all those other things and build on top of it. So there's a lot of onboarding for users. I think the saying goes like, somebody onboard the user onto Ethereum, then they sort of familiar with the rest. But in this case, like, you've got to onboard them onto Flow, and then other game developers would maybe sort of benefit from it. But I want to hear your thoughts about things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a lot of work, but all great things come with a lot of work. First and foremost, we do love Ethereum, and we're very grateful for Ethereum. It allowed us to see the light of decentralized apps. The reality, though, is Ethereum was not designed at its core to be a home for consumer scale decentralized applications. I don't believe that that's when they started, that's what they were designing for. And so it's really, really hard to build, even at the layer 2, when the core design of it is not meant for the thing that you're trying to do. I equate it to kind of the Nokia block phone. I don't know if you had one, but I had one when I was a little kid. It's great. It's really good at making phone calls. It has a very, very powerful flashlight, and it can run apps. It can run very small apps like Snake, and it's great. But you wouldn't want to build Angry Birds on the Nokia block phone. First and foremost, it would be really, really hard to build. It would take an absurd amount of time. And become very expensive, but also the user experience you'd be able to provide on that Nokia phone for Angry Birds is not great. The consumer would get really, really frustrated with that. Going to layer 2 is really kind of scotch taping solutions to try to make this thing that is not meant for one thing to make it better. And more importantly, we see it as it breaks composability, which we really see as the superpower of decentralized apps, the superpower of games, and essentially everything that Yat has been talking about, a world where people can very, very easily take their assets anywhere, and where developers can build on top of those. what building our layer 1 chain allowed us to do was take the learnings that we've had over the last 2 years building on ETH and the learnings we've had from speaking to the community and seeing what their problems were and build them into the layer 1. And that's important because it makes it easier for the next generation of developers. It allowed us to create things like smart user accounts where people can, where a user account can have smart contracts naturally added to it. Making it safer because people can have rules associated to the smart contract and password recovery, or making it really easy for Dapps developers to pay transaction fees on behalf of users, something that any game developer would want to do. It allowed us to build Cadence, an easier and safer smart contract language for users and for developers. And so it really allowed us to kind of go from the ground up and say, well, we believe in a future of decentralized applications. Can we create a great home where developers can build easily and and just worry about growing their app and making that successful? So really, how do we create a layer 1 chain that really just gets out of the way of the app developer, rather than the app developer having to struggle with the chain?
So there's a question from an audience. JC asked a question. Have any bigger gaming companies shown any interest in utilizing NFTs?
Go ahead. I feel like we both have different experiences, but you're probably more in touch than I am.
Go first.
Well, we've seen some of them already play in the space. Ubisoft has a blockchain team that we've collaborated with and working closely with, and their CEO Yves is really obsessed with NFTs and digital consumer rights, and so although it hasn't gone to the scale yet that we'd like, they're taking it very seriously. We've seen Turner Media come out with a golf game, and so that's a nice big step. So we're seeing some of these larger companies take this seriously. Yeah, I'll let you fill in a bunch of blanks.
Yeah, so that's definitely the case, but it's very much just like Ubisoft. It's a lab at the moment, and one of the challenges is, of course, is that typically speaking, when you're in a lab environment, it's reminiscent of the IT department 30 years ago, right? Which is like, yes, it's really important. We see the trend, but here's 5 people, right? And no disrespect to what's happening there, just that they're sort of experimenting with tiny parts of their budgets because they haven't, the business is doing well. There is no need to sort of disrupt yourself. So, but let's figure it out and see if there's what interesting models are. And normally in those environments, you have interesting sustained innovation, but it's very hard to be disruptive because you effectively sort of kill your own business. It's people talk about Apple as a company that ultimately disrupted itself, but when Steve Jobs came back in, actually Apple was on its knees, right? So it was a company that needed disrupting because otherwise it would get out of business. So I think the same is true with the video game industry, right? They see it. It's like mobile games 10 years ago. They saw it, but it took an acquisition of King.com 5-6 years later to say we have to enter this space. So they will go and buy things, but I don't think they'll build because it's just too much of an issue. That said, Ubisoft, like Square Enix, for instance, which is the creators of Final Fantasy, they invested in Sandbox, and their CEO actually wrote in their annual letter last year about sort of the importance of digital ownership and blockchain. So it's there. The narrative is beginning, but the actual investment hasn't happened sort of in a big way, because in a way they don't have to, right?
Yeah, it's a typical innovator's dilemma. Clay, for instance, narrated well, like why we want to build something that disrupt your own cash cow. Like it's really hard, and then just probably wait until and acquire some of the companies later on, I suppose. Let's talk about interesting NFT ideas. Maybe some of you out there, are there any interesting NFT ideas that you would like to see people build on that is not out in the market right now?
I can take a go. I think NFT-based preference matching to create deeper markets or price discovery And I think in general, we do need sort of more oracles, if you will, for the NFT space. If you look at, the sort of traditional art market, I think they had sales of about like $70 billion last year. And a lot of it is because you have Christie's and Sotheby's, facilitating sales is one thing, but I think, actually guiding on like the valuation of certain of these, certain like collectibles that are quite difficult to value otherwise. So we think that will, add a lot more liquidity and transparency to the space. Mick knows this as we've spoken about it before, but I'm really excited about the intersection of NFTs with real physical art as well. Having grown up, visiting a lot of galleries and museums, wondering about the sort of the future sustainability of these institutions. I think if you imagine, say, the MoMA or pick your local gallery tokenizing a piece of artwork in their permanent collection, it then allows them to prevent selling off, treasured pieces in their collection, and they can also invest in up and coming artists. And it serves as a young patrons program, because realistically, I don't see Gen Z going to Christie's and Sotheby's. Maybe that's just me, I don't know, but could they participate in an online auction for 0.1% of a Van Gogh through an NFT? Maybe that'll be pretty interesting to see from my perspective.
So maybe I think just a couple of things that I think would be interesting. One of them is so there's a lot of financial innovation that's obviously happening around this, right? And I think the interesting thing is the product side on this one, the narrative around sort of introducing financial services to NFT owners or gamers is interesting. So and we're seeing beginnings of this, right? But they're still not mainstream, right? There's companies out there that are beginning to sort of collateralize their NFTs and basically providing loan products. And this is, I think, just adds more sort of fuel to the sort of entire industry. So that's one area that I think is pretty exciting. And then the large part where I think the more big brands come in, and that's kind of what we're trying to do, but of course there's still more to come. More bigger brands come into the ecosystem, building out their sort of NFT space with IP, the more awareness will happen, and therefore we think more adoption will come in as well from outside.
It's interesting. I think what Min and Yet, you guys have pretty similar viewpoint. We sort of need like an art valuer, some professionals who can value all these different NFTs and professionally appraise this NFT we worth 10 ETH, 5 ETH, 20 ETH. And then once you have professional valuers, and then it could be a few different guys or professional art agencies, valuer agencies for these different NFTs. And then it's sort of built, there's sort of an agreed upon valuation for these NFTs which you can then use to collateralize them and draw out loan. I've seen some guys put NFT as collateral and draw a loan, which is DeFi narrative, which is really interesting. And so, and then I think what Min said about the auction, I think excuse me, I think it's interesting having auctions in the space as well. So I think we're running towards the last 5 minutes of this webinar. It's been really interesting having this discussion. I think I just open up the floor. If there's any one of you that want to give some last 1 minute comment of the space, or just leave it out for you guys.
I mean, for me, what I really find exciting about this space is that it really allows for, especially the composable environment, really allows for anybody with an idea to just throw it out there, throw it to the community, and kind of develop on it. And so really what I hope to see is more and more people playing around with NFTs and fungible tokens and everything in between, and just not be scared of failure, and just go with more experiments to see the multitudes of different things that can come out of it. I'm personally really excited about how NFTs and identity and proof of fandom and accessibility can all intermingle, so that I can have a trace of who I was and what I've accomplished, and how that can mingle with other people's identities and futures to essentially kind of show what I've done and what I've created and what access I can give to me and to others.
Yeah, I think from one thing that, I think resonated with me as we started this, Bobby, was when you mentioned that, it's been, the rise of NFTs has given us all a needed reprieve from DeFi. And, don't get me wrong, I love DeFi. I love that it gives everyone the agency of their own bank. I'm a fintech refugee myself, like there are boundless, possibilities here. But I think, we should also remember that we're here for other reasons too, aside from just maximizing yield. And, the ability to provide, content creators with better tooling to monetize their creations. I think that's something that we're extremely passionate about and something that I think everyone on this call really cares about too. And, exploring more of those use cases to provide tools to creators, to developers, because also it's fun and it makes us, when you see something that you care about and you own it, I think that's like a very, very human emotion, and I would love to see teams that explore more of that. Right, and of course DeFi has come to games as well now, right, and NFTs, right? So in some ways it's simply inescapable. But that's actually one of the things that I find really fascinating and exciting, because when you think about games in the past, because of its structure, it was child's play, right? And in a way, even though games themselves are not child's play anymore in terms of the size of the industry and the people involved, but for the customers, it's still a game, right, for the time being, and has no real sort of impact in your life. And most of our kids today, that's what they do. They play games, whether it's a Roblox or Sandbox or whatever it is, right? They play games. And one thing that I always found odd was, why is it that we don't really learn about economics and sort of finances until we go to college and are in debt, right? That's really the first awakening. Oh, this guy gave me a credit card. I can spend. Oh crap, it's 30% APR. What is that, right? I mean, the horror stories are legend. We all know this, right? But that's because our children do not learn about finance in school, right? And I grew up in Europe. Money was kind of a little bit of a dirty thing, so they don't talk about it. America is a little bit more commercial, but they throw you in debt. All these things. But imagine if our children learned about finances and economics when they're 8 or 9, which, by the way, they kind of quasi do in games, but has no impact. It's kind of make-believe money. But with this, actually, it's real finances, right? In micro ways, you can experiment. They can have their first loans. They can have their first debt. They can have their first investments, at 10 or 11 or 12. By the time they grow up to be adults, we'll have a completely different financial world that is more responsible, more aware, perhaps. And to me, that's really exciting, right? Games is beyond child's play, but it can also educate our children in this world.
Yeah, I guess we reach a time when the kids will one day wake up to, hey, parents, I've got like $100,000 in in-game item, like sell it and buy a house here. And
I have a funny story to that, actually. I think Mick might know this, but I actually bought my first stock because I sold a sword from World of Warcraft on eBay when I was 15. And I learned 2 lessons. Firstly, I forgot to do a search on eBay being 15, and I could have sold it for twice as much. And second thing, I also lost most of the money on the first stock I bought. But, the third thing is that, I have very understanding parents who are just like, oh goodness, what's she up to now? Like, fine, we'll help her transfer money. But you're like, as a 15-year-old, I didn't have a bank account, PayPal account. It was actually really horrendous. And so you're not actually encouraged to really play around with finances and learn important lessons when you're young and you can afford to. And that's why, crypto is so powerful. And actually, a lot of teenagers are unbanked in that regard.
Yeah, I can definitely agree to this thing. For the longest period of time, PayPal wasn't available to me when I was in Malaysia. And when I first got a PayPal account, I could use and transfer money, that felt like a big thing. And I don't know, I was 19 or 20 years old, somehow got an account in Singapore. But yeah, for the longest period of time, I was sort of unbanked. I have no debit card. It was hard to buy anything online. I had to rely on my parents, and that was really annoying. But I think blockchain offers teenagers a lot of opportunity to have their own, to bank themselves. So yeah, I think we've run out of time for today's webinar. It's been a great session. Min, Yet, and Mick. Thanks a lot for all the insights and sharing with us on your experience and insights on blockchain, Dapps, NFTs, and more. So thanks a lot once again to be on this panel. Yeah.
Always a pleasure.
Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby. It was great. Thanks a lot.